want to pop you over to Gauteng in Johannesburg. That's where the South African Council of Churches is holding a national anti-corruption conference for the next 2 days. Giving the keynote address is former Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. Let's listen in.
The factors that allow it to persist and the systems that maintain it. The sense I get from all this is that there is a strong feeling among the national church leaders of the SABC that in South Africa, corruption has reached such high proportions that now is the time for the church to have a deep reflection on whether whatever it has been doing all along to fight corruption is still the way to go. If the church believes that we have reached a turning point in our fight against corruption, I completely agree, because I believe we have. And this conference comes at the right time, because it comes 3 years, 1 month, and 1 day since the day on which I handed over to the President the last installment of the Commission's report on the 22nd of June 2022. And therefore, it is appropriate that the church, as well as all of us, should pause and say what has happened since then, and what should have happened, and why has it not happened? And is there something that we should do to make sure that what has not happened, which should have happened, does happen? Because if it doesn't happen, what will happen to this country? It has been 30 years since 1994. It has been over 30 years since 1994. And we have been fighting corruption. But instead of it going down, it is going up. It is as if we are not fighting. If we do not engage in a deep reflection on how we have been fighting corruption, on the factors that make it conducive for corruption to grow the way it is growing in this country, soon we will have to forget about the dream country that dominated the minds of many of us on 27 April 1994, as we stood in the sun, in those snake-like voting queues to cast our first vote as black people. We dreamed of this wonderful country that South Africa would be after democracy. A country where no one would go to bed without a meal. A country where everyone would have decent housing. A country where everyone would have access to clean water. A country in which everyone would be able to earn an income for a reasonable livelihood. A country where children would learn in decent schools. A country in which the sick and injured would go to clinics and hospitals and not only find enough qualified medical staff, but also find that the clinics and hospitals have the basic medicines needed to treat them. What made the country we had in mind wonderful was not that it was going to be a country that would give its citizens a luxurious life. No. Coming from apartheid, we could not have had that kind of country in mind. What would have made our country a wonderful country for us would have been a country that afforded its people the basic needs of life. Indeed, the things I've just mentioned above as things that would have made us think of our country as a wonderful country that we dreamt of are basic needs covered by the fundamental rights entrenched in our Bill of Rights, such as the right to human dignity, the right to have access to adequate housing, the right of access to healthcare services, the right of access to sufficient food and water. This also refers to every child's right to basic nutrition, shelter, basic health care services. It also refers to the right to basic education. Unfortunately, more than 30 years after the advent of democracy, the reality is that there are still many people who go to bed without a meal, who go to clinics and hospitals when they are sick or injured and find that there are not enough doctors or nurses to help them. Or if there are doctors and nurses, certain basic medicines are not there. There are still many who live in conditions of abject poverty. Indeed, who live in conditions of indignity because of corruption. There are still many learners who go to schools that have no decent toilets because of corruption. There are still many learners who go to school without school books for months at the beginning of each year because of corruption. There are many people whose municipalities are not able to deliver basic services because of corruption. And we are happy that the Auditor General is here today because year in, year out, she keeps on telling those in authority about these challenges in municipalities and in state-owned entities. And not only do they not listen, I think very often they don't even care to read her reports. And that is scandalous. It is these features of our democratic South Africa that I believe have moved the SACC to call this conference, to reflect deeply at what needs to be done, However, before I move on, let me make it clear that what I've said does not mean that nothing has been done to improve the lives of people since 1994. I acknowledge that a lot has been done over the past years to improve the lives of many people. However, what I do say is that there is equally a lot that has not been done, partly because of corruption, with the result that there are too many people who live in conditions that I've described that are completely unacceptable in a constitutional democracy such as ours. Most corruption in South Africa takes place under public procurement or the tender system. If you can drastically reduce corruption in the procurement system, that will go a long way to significantly reduce corruption levels in this country. In its report, the State Capture Commission recorded as follows, and I quote, "The government is the biggest procurement procurer of goods and services in the country. In 2017, the South African Revenue Service statistics show that the government channeled 967 billion rand through public procurement, which equates to 19.5% of the GDP. The estimated total procurement spend of government for goods and services is over 800 billion rand a year, close quotes. In many instances, the evidence before the Commission revealed that corruption took many forms. The legislation governing procurement requires transparency, cost effectiveness, and competitiveness. However, there are exceptions that are provided for where that transparency and sometimes that competitiveness may be condoned or dispensed with. And it is those exceptions provided for in the law that have been abused by those whose agenda is to enrich themselves through corruption in order to put corruption at the levels at which it is in our country. You would find that there were goods and services that were not needed but were procured, or you would find that there is duplication of contracts. You would find that the law provided for deviation from the norm of what should be done when an entity seeks to procure goods and services in a manner that is constitutional, in a manner that is lawful, but there would be frivolous or fraudulent abuse of the deviation provisions. You would find that there is provision for confinement of the processes in particular SOEs, but that process would be abused in order to ensure that certain entities which otherwise would never get the tender in a competitive process are given contracts through the back door. Of course, you would find, as we all heard during the time of the evidence of the Commission and in the Commission's report, that those who sought to enrich themselves through corruption and state capture identified in government departments and SOEs people of integrity, people who would not cooperate in their corruption agenda, in their state capture agenda, and they made sure, together with those who helped them from the highest office in government, remove the public servants of integrity who were not prepared to involve themselves in corruption, in order to install or have appointed persons who were their friends, who were prepared to allow them to pursue corruption. The evidence of the Commission in regard to those was massive, and those who have had a chance to read the report will have seen that the evidence is overwhelming. Part 1 of Volume 3 of the Commission's report details many different ways used to pursue the agenda of corruption. Of course, the fight against corruption includes the fight against state capture. This brings me to what the church and all of us need to do. There may be many things that we can all do. I think much of what needs to be done to fight corruption cannot and should not be done by the church in isolation. I think the church must fight corruption as part of society as society continues in its fight against corruption. We must fight this scourge together. Nevertheless, the church's voice may be louder and stronger than other voices within society. Therefore, the church must play its role, raise its voice, and speak strongly against corruption, without fear, without favor, without prejudice. And in this regard, I do want to add this, that the rules that we use to fight corruption must be the same for everybody. And the church must help us to make sure that the rules are known and everybody makes sure that the rules apply to everybody, irrespective of who you are. We must not have a situation where, because you are popular, we bend the rules when you have done something wrong. Because that has happened in this country. It should not have happened. The church must be the one that leads us. And it must tell the rest of us, do not bend the rules. The rules apply to everybody.
We're listening there to former Chief Justice Raymond Zondo delivering the keynote address at the South African Council of Churches Anti-Corruption Conference, which is currently underway in Johannesburg. A number of noteworthy statements there from the former Chief Justice saying the rules that are used to fight corruption must not have eyes, essentially. You know, it must be used for everybody without discriminating according to popularity. In other words, it must be fair game for everybody who's accused and in fact is guilty of corruption. He's spoken about how, despite the efforts that have been put in place to combat the scourge of maladministration, it seems we're actually losing the fight. And if this trend continues, the dreams that many people held in 1994 will be lost forever.